Greetings, fellow classic TV fans, and welcome to Retro TV Radio. I'm your host, Pat McCormack. On today's show, we have yet another awesome celebrity joining us. Assuming most of you remember the classic TV series The Brady Bunch, then you'll be thrilled to hear that today's guest is none other than Christopher Knight. Enjoy this interview as we talk about his exciting life and his successful podcast, co-hosted by Barry Williams, The Real Brady Bros. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast, the iconic Christopher Knight.
Hello, Pat. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you today.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'll have you know that I am a huge fan of the Brady Bros podcast, The Real.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that it's being consumed and liked.
From day one, and now I look forward to it every Monday. I'm like, all right.
Well, you'll have to be honest with me. Do we sound like we completely lost our minds? Our memories fail us at times, and it's quite fun for us. But I'm sometimes wondering whether or not our audience is just wonderfully forgiving, or they're just laughing at us because we're two old men that can't remember our childhoods correctly.
No, it flows, and it flows wonderfully. And you guys, of course, you're 50 plus, is it? Episodes in?
Oh, yes, we are. But it's not as though it's tied to a particular year, like our memory is failing with the older episodes. It has to do with how much that episode intersected with our lives and somehow has been held in memory, and how unremarkable some of the episodes seem to have been recorded in our memories that challenge us. And at least we're there, dissecting the show, something we really hadn't watched in 40, 50 years. So that's present. But some of the history surrounding the show, is a bit of a challenge. In other episodes, it's front and center. I mean, it's been seminal. So.
Well, it's probably good for you, when you think about it. It's like, I'll be honest with you, the first thing that struck me when listening to the podcast was this. How is it that these guys' voices have not aged? I mean, I hate to tell you, but when I'm actually honored to tell you, Christopher, you sound just like you did when you were on the show. And it's just astonishing. You're living a healthy life, obviously.
Yeah, I am. I'm pondering this question. It never dawned on me that in the abstract, do voices age? I guess they go through some kind of arc. They certainly do as you mature, but then do they show the same kind of range? I'll use that kindly. That we visually present over time. We obviously have a lot that we go through as we age that changes us. And I'm not sure the voice goes through the same things. I'm sure at the, in a weakened state, I'm sure that the voice does sound differently. And so luckily, I'm not at that frail state at this time. So I'm advancing in age. And I'm going to have to take a step back and listen to us and hold our podcast up against our episodes. I think my voice, though, in the episodes probably didn't fully mature even into the fifth season. So that you say that is remarkable. That I thought that my voice was still a little bit high even in the fifth season, but it was maybe just my delivery.
Well, and it's just true. You have this youthful sound, both of you. I mean, you and Barry both just sound youthful and enthusiastic, and that really rubs off on the listener, which is why I think it's such a great podcast. You guys are real, and you listen to you guys, and it's like, wow, time warp. How is it that they sound so youthful? And I got to add that I met you at the CroftCon a few months back, and you still look youthful, Christopher. So don't write that off.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
I saw it in person.
It's funny. You look at yourself in the present, and you wonder, oh, look at how old I'm getting. But then when you look at pictures from just 4 years ago, with a similar recollection of how you regarded yourself at that time, you regard yourself as so much younger. It's like
It's gravity.
It's like you'll be happy for that again. If you can just get what you look like 5 years ago.
As always, a friend says, gravity always wins.
Yes.
Ultimately wins too, I think.
It wins. But it's interesting that maybe it doesn't with the voice completely. Well, I've never really thought. I mean, most of us have friends probably that we met as adults, and I don't know if we recognize any voice changes in adult friendships until maybe end of lifetime. But I like, other than my brothers and sisters, the Brady cast is our friends from childhood. So we have recordings of them. So I know I didn't sound like me in the first 3 seasons, or at least I didn't sound in the first 3 seasons as I do now.
Well, listening to the show, and when you have them on as guests, they still sound great and very much like their characters did as well. So there was something in the water at the studio.
I think it's also. I think it's a power of suggestion. It's a show about reminiscing, and those who listen to it are reminiscing with us, and are maybe prone to hearing that part of us,
right?
The same part of us that still exists inside of us.
Yeah,
that was there at that time. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love when you bring the sibs on. It just adds such another great dimension, and it's obvious you guys all still love each other, no matter what they say.
Foxhole buddies. That's what we are.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, I mean, this era of when the Brady Bunch was popular, and some years afterwards, let's face it, for you and for your peers, we're mutual friends with Kathy Garver, and I think when she's, by the way, thanks for this, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, she got us together. Her book is Surviving Sissy, which I thought was just such a great title because literally in that era, it was treacherous. Just the lifestyle, the pitfalls. I read Maureen's book, believe me. I know they were there. How did you dodge that crap?
I don't know, by the way, if it's any less treacherous today. In fact, probably more treacherous today than it was then. But the similarity is just simply success at a young age has an effect that you can't guarantee is going to last. I mean, so I think the hard part, the treachery, is one back then was this idea that that it's not so much the experience of being a child star, but it's when that ends its run,
right? And
how then where that leaves you and how you work with that moving forward. That's the difficult part. Yeah. I mean, it's almost as though you're built for the storm, and then there is none. What are you built for? And you're used to a lot of attention that's not there. And that perhaps is one of the reasons I survived it. I mean, just simply because I'm uncomfortable with the attention. So for me, that was the struggle for me, is how to handle attention that wasn't comfortable. It certainly made me grow.
It may have saved your life, sounds like.
And it's like if I write my book, it will become, my title would be My Accidental Life, because it certainly isn't one that I would have planned for myself. But looking at it, it's provided me things that I wouldn't have sought for myself that have rounded me in ways that I couldn't have anticipated would have been of a value, and certainly have been. So.
Well, and of course, most people know you as the accomplished actor and, the one and only Peter Brady. But, perhaps they're not familiar with the fact that you had other talents. Specifically, you called yourself a geek, which, of course, back then that wasn't such a nice word. Now,
yeah,
nerd and geek. Yes, that's what I
remember telling my mom, at one point, that I was a nerd, and it was, I don't know if she had not heard it before. I might have been, 13 or so. And I referenced myself as a nerd. And I remember her just chuckling at that. What's a nerd? What's a nerd? Go ahead, it's somebody who can get lost in the minutia.
Right.
It's like, I tend to be that way. I was once taught by somebody, I don't know, it wasn't a statistics class, but it was either geometry or, algebra or something. It probably was geometry. That infinity, we think of infinity as from here to forever, but there's an infinity between 2 points, no matter how distant those 2 points are apart. And that was very comforting because it's an unlimited space.
Yeah.
You can wrap your mind around it.
That's amazing. So you think about it. So somehow there was a measurable infinity between your passing arm and Maureen's poor nose.
Yes.
That point A to point B. And I'm thinking, is it true that you really threw that ball?
Barry and I discussed this, and I can't. In my mind, I threw that ball. Now I don't know, in all honesty, if I actually did. I certainly wanted to. In thinking about when that show was produced and how that scene was done, if it was done in the summertime and I didn't have school to check into, and I believe it was, I would have been on set, able, with her close-up, to throw the ball. Because I wasn't needed for that shot to be there for an off-stage look. Right. Because it comes in, and takes her by surprise. But I do have the recollection, whether this is my fantasy of real events, or if it really happened, that the prop man who was tossing the ball was having difficulty hitting her nose. And also, depending on how they framed it, and I believe they were relatively tight, but there was still some need for the ball to come in point first, not just lobbed up so that it seems to be hitting her sideways. And he wasn't, he was kind of lofting it there, unspinning, and sort of so that the middle of the ball was hitting her forehead or their nose. And it was a Nerf ball. It was a special effects Nerf ball. I believe this was before Nerf things came to market. So, but it was literally that same kind of material that was very soft. But Maureen also had the difficult challenge of knowing it was coming and not blinking,
right,
and flinching. And she was a flincher, so it was difficult. And the faster it came, the better, but not too fast that it would hurt her. So, and I remember being, let me do it. I'll do it, because it's just a joy for me to get under Maureen's skin. And that's how I remember it, that I helped them get the shot because I tossed the football.
Well, with that vivid of a memory, I rest my case. Clearly, Chris threw the ball, folks. He did. Yeah. And he's proud of it. That's what I'm getting from this. And
one of the things I've learned after, being somebody who is referenced quite a bit historically or in the past, that history is defined by those who care to remember the story or make it up, or insist upon the story being the way they're retelling it. So the most vociferous of the storytellers ends up being the one who creates the history, even if it's incorrect. So whether or not I make it up, it is the way that it was.
Well, I believe it. You made a believer of me.
That's how I remember it.
Wow. So many just fantastic memories that you guys share on the show. And, I know it's episode by episode. And I'm curious, as I'm sure many of your fans are, what happens when you run out of episodes?
On a podcast?
Yeah.
We don't know. we realize that it's an episodic recap, but it doesn't have to be an episodic recap forever. We will finish up these episodes. Perhaps we'll dive into some of the other Brady movies and other things that we did. I would like us to actually have at times some super fans on who were known by the world.
Right.
Because obviously the Bradys were something in most of America's lives, if you're over 30. And again, I mean, kids even, are still watching it today. So when they're adults, they'll have some memory of it. But still, most of those who fondly remember the Brady Bunch don't recall watching it on Friday night.
Right.
They're younger than me. They watched it after school in an hour or 2 hour block, back from that time, whence latchkey kids was a term that was coined. We're sort of a surrogate family member, brother, sister, family for those who, had parents, that were still at work. And again, I know in LA here at times it played in a 2 hour block. So there's 4 episodes, back to back. And I always thought that, it couldn't have been that hard for them not to schedule them, in sequence. And that would have made much more sense. And here I am, we're doing our podcast totally out of sequence. Yes. So, and we're doing it out of sequence on purpose. And that is because, there are different episodes that hit us differently. For instance, the hero episode for me was a seminal sort of product of my development because I was very raw. I mean, I can't say that I was an actor, but that's not what Sherwood was looking for. He was looking for kids who could act, not little actors. So, and he got that with me, barely, getting lines out. I laugh at myself for not having an idea of how to emphasize any line. And in my inability to make a decision on what part of any line should be emphasized, I just emphasized every word, which just ends up in this crazy kind of scream talk that I know now what my issues were, because as an adult, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Of course, there's no late onset ADHD. So I had it as a child. And here I have all this stuff to rewatch that now, having the knowledge I have about ways that it is evidenced in an individual, that I can see it in myself. I can see it oozing out. I always wondered what my problem was in staying still. I twitched. I mean, I twitched it, and I didn't have a tic. It's not like I twitched in real life. It's just all that energy being asked to stay in one place was difficult for somebody that was always in motion. Right. But there was no option. You had to stay there. That's what the director required of you. And, it just came out. The energy still came out. And in fits and, and starts in my speech and in some twitching that went on, because it was very unnatural for me to stay still. And I can see that. I can see every scene where the kids are running down the stairs. I don't believe there's one instance where I'm not first, because that was just me. It was like a race to get anywhere,
Well, you made it work. There's no doubt about it. And that's one of the things.
Well, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's one of the things about the podcast that I really enjoyed too, which is, and the moral of the story is, and you guys throw your 2 cents in on that, and there is always a good moral. And like you said, the hero, keep your ego in check. That kind of stuff that you guys throw in there, I think is just, that's a treasure.
They were morality plays in the first season into the second season. And that makes sense now in doing these episodes and watching them all and reviewing them and breaking them down. I can see sort of what was going on in the development of the show. You sell a pilot, and you then, once it's sold, you have this idea of what the series is about. And in our case, it's the envelope is the title song, right? The theme song is the story. This woman with 3 girls meeting this man with 3 boys and becoming a family. We become a family very rapidly. There's never uttered, "You're not my mom," at any time. And we're acting as loving brothers and sisters, by the second part of the first season. And from the second season on, there is no vestige of us having been separate families. There is no reference to it, and there is no use of that kind of theory in any of the performances. It is, you're literally acting as though you were brothers and sisters. And that's right for the kind of show we were trying to be. There was no place for that kind of, if we were a drama, of course, we would have had that as part of what creates the drama, the discourse about you not having, that your step, sisters are, worth less than your real brothers. And the morals were sort of early on what the shows were built on.
Right.
And their concept of, and this is where I think I was afforded a great deal of freedom, although I've understood from others that being a middle child does not represent freedom. And that's an interesting place. But that you can have 2 alternate views of what being a middle child means, but there is no alternate view of what the oldest child is and what the youngest child is.
Right.
Those are hard-edged etchings, and it's easy to build a characterization, a broad characterization of what an oldest child is or what a youngest child is. And in our case, there's really 2 sets, because Greg is the oldest of all, but he's the oldest of the boys, and Marsha gets part of that as well because she's oldest of the girls. And then, of course, Cindy is burdened with being the youngest. Michael as well, the youngest of the boys. That burden, though, was never able to be. The character was never able to be released from that burden. And I can see now how traumatic that is, that was for Susan to live through.
Oh, yeah.
And watching the shows, it's this character that they used at times like a device.
Yeah. Because
they could get cute with her. They prevented her from growing up, even though she should have been able to be more mature, was still acting in ways that she did in the first season because she's the youngest and the cutest and the one that can be forgiven. Greg is the oldest and the leader. Well, it kind of, leaves the middle wide open. Right. Now, that created for Jan an identity crisis, but for Peter and me, it was like, this is great for a person who doesn't want attention. It leaves you anonymous. You can be whatever you want to be in the middle.
I just can't picture Peter going, Greg.
Right, exactly. So there is in the middle is like all this other freedom. And as an actor, having writers not write you in cliche fashion is freeing.
Right.
But Susan or Cindy was written in a cliche fashion. Greg more so. And all of us, identified with simple, broad stroke outlines in that, at least the first 11, 12 episodes, which were all written up front as the show was ready to go, into production. So before they really knew us and our little personalities, they wrote scripts about, kids living together under one roof that earlier were just two families learning to get along. And that's Sherwood's ongoing theme with all of his shows, putting disparate people together and them working it out. And we're an example of that. But because of that, the first episodes are sort of written in more stark fashion. And I wouldn't have recognized that if I didn't go back and do the podcast needing to review, the shows and see it firsthand, that I can sort of identify how, these scripts were authored. And, let's do a show about this. Let's do a show about when you find something, if you find a person's wallet, what do you do? They're more sort of general plays on morality. And as we get into the later years, it's more kind of personality driven, more quirky. Although I do believe that the best episodes were in the second season, interestingly.
Yeah.
When those characters and the family were, and the type of humor that it worked better. By the time we were teenagers, it didn't work as well. Though the shows were more about the quirks of the personalities. Sometimes we launch into vaudeville or broad slapstick kind of humor that was harder for to buy into, for me at least.
Right. Well, don't worry. We're not going to bring up magic in this interview, so you can relax. You got to explain it to me. Oh, no. Of course, what an era, what an iconic show, and, we're all grateful to you, and I'm sure a lot of people who are going through that, I don't know if this was Sherwood's master plan, but going through that ugly, broken family phenomenon, which is was so, well, it was just too much of it. That maybe really helped a lot of people just manage through that by example,
We didn't know we were doing that, but I do know that Sherwood did have a consciousness of this. I don't think that the epidemic of broken families was recognized in the time that we were doing it. It would become recognized, later in the 70s and throughout the 80s. But I believe what he was doing was trying to diversify what television was depicting, that, in the landscape of the American family, there are some that, for whatever reason, are a blend. They're not the perfect, nuclear family, that was, earlier represented almost exclusively through the 50s and early 60s. So
right.
We were Ozzie and Harriet without having to be gifted with, that kind of, not born in.
Yeah.
But the same sentiment.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so it worked. And hallelujah.
Yes, it did. It worked remarkably well. And I have to say, that, it's some of the frustrations that I had, and some of the stuff that we were asked to do, I watch it now and I think, it's mostly represented in my hair, how wrong I was. I had to have one thing they couldn't change in me that was, inalterable in my hair. And now I laugh thinking, oh gosh, I wish I would have listened to somebody. But the fact is that Sherwood got it. He understood. He understood where a 10-year-old exists.
Right.
And we all need to remember how we existed as 10. The world would be a better place if we all had the same temperaments.
Yeah.
A friendliness as that we did at 10.
Exactly right. And so, this is why, folks, you have to get into your favorite podcast format and subscribe to the Real Brady Bros, because I guarantee you will love it. You'll look forward to it every freaking week. I promise you. So, gosh, I hope you guys keep doing it somehow. My quick thought was like, what if you guys talked about other shows of the era and what you thought of them? Or were you just working way too much to even know about any other shows?
Well, I'll run out of shows there too, because there will be a time, in my late 20s and early 30s where I didn't watch television for 10 years because I was working.
Yeah.
I will, it's no matter which course you take, the landscape isn't infinite in that one direction, but doesn't mean you can't turn around and go back the other way.
Right.
We could do shows on just the psychology of the Brady Bunch of family, and I do know that there's professors out there who've written curriculum using the Bradys as some kind of
equation.
It's cultural or society and how it relates to the Bradys, or how the Bradys represent in some fashion, society. And I'm fascinated to learn more about that. So, because it seems so simple. And as I'm watching these shows, I'm realizing, it isn't that simple.
Right. Right. Well, and as I said in the beginning, before we actually got on the air, I only have a million questions regarding the Brady Bunch, so we better get started. But the fact is, and we've covered a lot, and I want people to know that you reinvented yourself, or I should say, you didn't got caught in the trappings. We've established that, but then you got into the tech field, and from what I've read, did some pretty cool stuff. How cool is that you were able to transfer into that career where, again, somebody was like, how are you doing this? Aren't you an actor?
Very lucky that was there for me. I had friends already poking their nose into it. We had, where I grew up is, a hotbed of aerospace and technology. So they were transitioning out of that and into personal computers, and I had an epiphany through my own use of a personal computer because, again, being a little bit
geeky.
Yeah, well, geeky and a little having a little bit of this ADD stuff, and having things that were interesting to me became a rabbit hole, and things that just didn't click with me became impossible to digest. So, why it was that I had such a hard time reading, I wish I knew then what I now know. But I was lucky that I kind of forgave myself, because I thought, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't know why I can't get through Tale of Two Cities, and why it just seems like I just turned, 50 pages and have no idea what I read. But I put my finger under every word as I went. None of it was being absorbed. But I could read a manual of something that meant nothing to most people, but to me was meaningful, and I could spend hours on it. So it had, so it wasn't a reading problem; it was an interest issue.
Right.
And so the computer to me was this device that organized my life, that I could trust. I could put it in, it would straighten it out. I had a black book or a telephone book I couldn't read. So it was useless to me.
Right.
After a while, it's like there's people's names outside of their alphabetical order because there was no room left on all the scratch outs. And it would think that if it wasn't working for you, you would try a different technique. But yeah, there was no time spent on going backward to clean that up. But the computer allowed it all just to be clean, and it helped spell for me, which was a challenge. And it had no attitude, it just did it, and it freed me up to write, and it was this wonderful thing that was introduced to my life, and as a result of other friends being in that particular arena, I got involved and took right to it,
right.
and it was definitely right down my alley, because it was useful, it was practical, it was technology, it was leading edge.
A lot of people don't take the opportunity to say it helped me create, and that's the thing.
Right.
That I read this quote by Robert Rodriguez, who said, "If you bridge the gap between creativity and technology, the world is yours."
Right. I saw in the software programmers, or those on the that were really actually laying out, if it was hardware, the hardware, they were just like actors. They were quirky. That kind of talent was it wasn't prescribed. It sort of came out of them at all times. It reminded me of those in the entertainment industry. So Silicon Valley and Hollywood are sort of like sort of a continuum.
Right.
The output is slightly different. And now they've completely collided and have married, so you can't really have movies without technology.
Well, now nobody give me any hate mail because I didn't quote Robert perfectly what I just said he said, but it was along those lines. And
he's right.
He is right. And it's still hard for me because I'm a musician. I always just want to create. And then, of course, once I found out that I could record albums on my own, then I started cozying up to the technology. I think as an actor, and I may be wrong in your case, but I think you probably felt some sort of creative juice with this. Is that fair to think?
It's funny because for me, the interest in it was all the ways it could be applied. Mm. I started with computers back when they weren't very visual at all. They were, it was a DOS screen when Excel was this application that ran on a Macintosh, and Lotus 1-2-3 ran on, a DOS-based machine. And the Lotus 1-2-3 was just incredibly difficult to use because you had to remember all the keystrokes. Right. And here's this Excel thing, and it makes a lot more sense. It's
you'd have to flip the tape on the cassette tape on the hard drive.
You have to remember too much on the Lotus 1-2-3. You have to actually be doing it every day to become proficient at it. And wasn't how I would use it in that case if it presented me a solution to a problem. I mean, if it kept my checkbook, if it kept my data, it was a database for me, and it helped me write. But I was curious about what it could do, what this computer thing could do, because it as it presented like the differences between the WYSIWYG difference between Lotus 1-2-3 and Excel is an example of just it's doing the same thing. It's just doing it in such a different way that the visual representation is fundamentally groundbreaking.
Yeah. And
it can go much further than that. And that, then you start using it actually as a medium to create with, in the 3D space is where I would eventually go. In the creation, as I was sort of gravitated toward the visualization of that particular compartment of computer technology, which had and would have tremendous growth and arc still to today, with all the requirements to make things look photoreal, or as we see like with watching Avatar, all that processing power and rendering and 3D with enough creative input knowing what you need to see and what it takes to drive that and the technology behind it, that a complete falsification or a creation of a replication of our world could be made. It might take some time, but that the computer can also do that. I mean, it's endless what it can do. And of course, then with smartphones, we see how, in how many different ways it could be applied. I mean, I was even amazed that why does a smartphone need a camera? And then it's made very clear to me that there's a benefit to having a camera everywhere, and it's technology's just, I believe, a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of science and technology. I believe in the truth of science and scientific method as a way to break the logjam of real and fantasy.
Yes.
And it's not real and fantasy because we take tools and make fantasy, but to adjudicate whether or not something is real or imagined. Right. Scientific method has to be applied in my book, and the world's I'm a curious person. I want to know how things work. My issue with magic, is because of this. I feel fooled, and I know that I have been, and it's not a good feeling. I want to know how it is that I could be so easily deceived while watching it, knowing I'm being deceived.
Yes.
I watch for the deceit, and it's like, well, that's magic. The whole thing is deceit. Go with it.
There's a scientific fact to all of this, and I'm going to find it. You are the magician's nightmare, Christopher Knight. I can tell.
I would, yes, I am. The power of the magician scares the hell out of me.
Well, I agree. I'm on the same page when it comes to your philosophy in regards to, let's look at the facts, and the facts, even though they're Mother Nature and they're miraculous in themselves, these are the facts. These are not man-made facts. Let's kind of cruise with those for a while. Don't get me started on AI, though, because I don't want to open up any floodgates here.
Yeah, hey, look, it's like anything else. Like I remind people at times, if you were driving down the street and the car in front of you stopped short and you turned, you were on a freeway and you turned the wheel hard to the left and crashed into the center barrier, do you take from that the next time you turn really hard to the right? You could. And in a lot of our thinking, that's obviously what we would try.
Yeah.
It isn't a matter of that. You got to find the balance. And the answer isn't always prescriptive. It changes from moment to moment. But either or is probably never going to lead you to the right destination.
Right.
There is some place in the middle that's hard to find and has to be felt.
Right. Wow. Well, I knew you'd go deep for us because, you're gifted in that area, and it's so fascinating. I appreciate that. And again, from software to hardware. Like, what are you getting at, Pat? Christopher Knight Brands.
Yes. This has been a tremendous boon in my, life over the last 10 years, and a surprise, and something that is an outgrowth of Brady, is an outgrowth of what being a Brady means to people. And Brady is it's somewhere in the orbit with Boy Scout, but you can't tarnish it.
Right.
And in doing the furniture and using the brand in furniture has taught me a great deal about the power of maintaining a trusted persona, and that I've always wanted to be somebody that people could trust. Don't make promises you can't keep, and try to be compassionate, try to be balanced, try to be fair, and positive, because, sort of like how the Brady's struck me as like Brady's was much more, it was a much fairer environment than the environment that I was growing up in at home. And if I could have a choice, if I had a choice in the matter, I would want to duplicate what I had with the Brady's, not what I had, in my own family. And it's there for anybody. Any case, the outgrowth of all that is that being a Brady meant that by extension, I was trusted. I knew I was, and that's who I am as a person as well. And I wanted to protect that. And it's very easy for that to come crumbling down, in today's open market.
Oh, yes.
And the furniture is a place that needed that kind of assistance in the way that it was applied. When it was first brought to me, that we'd love to make you a brand, and it was brought to me. It wasn't my brainchild. I thought it was an ex-business partner and friend that I grew up with who had this idea. And I thought, okay, I think you're nuts, but okay, give it a try. I'll just do a handshake deal with you. And if you tell me it's useful to you, I'll buy in. Let's try it. Let's give it a go, and made a fair deal. Probably not a deal that anybody who had an agent, no agent would allow their client to make the deal that we made. They would probably ask for too much, but it was, as far as I'm concerned, a very fair deal. And it's proved to be beneficial to all. And the thing that it did is, in this marketplace, it's wide open. If you look at furniture, really much of the furniture that's purchased is not brand driven. Nobody cares who made it. You touch it and feel it, and it's capable of doing what it promises. And if it's a chair, that means that you can sit in it. It will hold your weight, and it's somewhat comfortable. And it comes to your house the color that you thought it was supposed to be. If it can do those things, you'll be happy with it, provided you also weren't robbed in buying it. But people needed to know, of all the selections that were available, which to buy. And that's where the name came in. And that was trusted. Of all things that we have in our lives, furniture was one of the latter things to come to make an online presence, because it's difficult.
Yeah.
But if you can present something that is going to meet their expectations, and you can do that with enough consistency, you'll have a business at the end. But you have to have them make the selection. Those making the furniture, designing the furniture, and creating that which ultimately arrives at the house are part of the equation. And then I became the front end of that equation, helping reduce the resistance to making a furniture purchase online. And then it just took off from there. And
it's quality. Quality backs up anything. Well, so people can find this line. It's Christopher Knight Brands.
It's Christopher Knight Home. The furniture is all under Christopher Knight Home. It is online only, available mostly at Amazon.com, Overstock.com, and at Target.com.
Gosh, and where did I get Brands from?
Brands is my company that holds Home and Collection. And Collection is not as easy to find. There are some things under Collection. Collection is sort of reserved for stuff that's not furnishings and stuff yet to come.
And would you call it Oprah approved? Oh, I don't want to open any floodgates there.
Yeah, that was interesting. That's just having something that didn't come through the official channel. So I was very quiet on that, only because I couldn't tell, that it was ours. And if somebody's buying your furniture and using it, but they're making no claim to it, it's hard to stand up and, raise your hand and say, that's me. Well,
I'll do it for you, folks. If you want to watch the Prince Harry interview with Oprah, then you will see these beautiful chairs from Christopher's collection. I think that's how Oprah would say it. From his collection.
That was Christopher Knight Home, but it was part of the Christopher Knight Home collection, because so the Christopher Knight Home, in the collection of furniture that we have there, at times we have 4,000 SKUs. It is an emporium. It's not a design philosophy. It is a practical solution. And our philosophy is designing or making a world you love. And that's your choice, what goes into your world. Yeah,
that's a great slogan. Well, this has been fantastic. Christopher, I want to thank you so much for joining us and just giving us the inside scoop on all this stuff. You're a great guest, an open book, and Again, folks, if you haven't listened to the Real Brady Bros or heard of it, now you have. You got to listen. You got to subscribe. You got to do all those things that you would normally do for me. Would somebody please do that for me? Anyone? Anyway.
I dare say if you're a Brady fan, you'll love it. Frankly, if you're just a parent, you might enjoy it. It's been a gas. It's been a learning experience.
It's fantastic. I'm just still waiting for that episode where you guys both say the real Brady in perfect
together
unison.
We will do that when we produce one from the same location.
We both know the computer could do it for you.
Technology won't allow us to do it in unison. So we have to be tabled in the same space.
It's perfect, though. It's like people go, gosh, they're really not perfect.
It is mind-bogglingly, impossible.
Well, thanks, Christopher, and good luck with the future of the podcasting. If there is a future, I'll be there, and go sell some furniture.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. There you have it. Another retro TV radio episode in the books. Be sure to go to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to The Real Brady Bros. You will love it. Also, go online to check out Christopher Knight Home and check out all the incredible merchandise they have to offer. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast, and if so inclined, please leave me a positive rating and review. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Golden Rage of TV, and on Twitter at Golden Rage of TV1. I'm your host, Pat McCormack, and thanks for listening to Retro TV Radio.